10 disturbing, terrifying, true trucker horror stories. Story 1. The westbound lane that never ended. The exit sign for Amarillo passed Marcus Holloway's driver's side window for the fourth time in 20 minutes, and his fuel gauge now read 3/4 full when it had been sitting on empty for the last hour. The numbers on his digital clock were counting backward. He slammed his palm against the dashboard of his Peterbilt 379, but the green digits continued their reverse progression. 11:47 p.m. became 11:46, then 11:45. His CB radio crackled with his own voice from earlier that evening, asking for road conditions ahead, except this time when the static cleared, he heard himself screaming. Marcus had been running Interstate 40 through the Texas Panhandle for 17 years, knew every truck stop and weigh station between Oklahoma City and Albuquerque. The highway stretched before him in the wash of his headlights, perfectly straight, perfectly normal, except it wasn't. Every mile marker he passed was number 217, every single one. He'd noticed the problem around 11 p.m. when he realized he'd been driving for 3 hours without seeing another vehicle. Not one car, not one truck. The CB had gone silent except for occasional bursts of static that sounded almost like words spoken backward. He'd tried calling his dispatcher, but his cell phone showed no signal, and when he checked his recent calls, every number was his own. The arithmetic didn't work. He'd fueled up in Shamrock at 8:30 p.m., topped off his twin saddle tanks, all 300 gallons. Should have given him maybe 1,500 miles of range hauling the refrigerated trailer behind him, the reefer unit humming its familiar diesel rhythm. But he'd been driving west on I-40 for what felt like 5 hours now, and the fuel gauge kept rising. Quarter tank, half tank, 3/4. Marcus keyed his CB radio. "Breaker 19, this is Bulldog Express, anybody out there?" His own voice answered immediately, but the words were wrong. "Don't stop driving. If you stop, you'll see what's in the mirrors." He jerked his hand off the radio like it had burned him. The voice had been his, absolutely his, but he hadn't said those words. His eyes flicked involuntarily to his driver's side mirror. The highway behind him looked normal in the red glow of his trailer lights. Empty, but normal. Then he saw the girl. She stood on the shoulder, maybe 100 yards back, wearing a yellow sundress that whipped in the wind from his passing truck. Except he hadn't passed her. She'd appeared in his mirror already behind him, and now she was waving both arms over her head. No, not waving. The gesture was too frantic, too desperate. She was trying to warn him of something. Marcus felt his foot ease off the accelerator instinctively. The Peterbilt began to slow, and the moment it dropped below 60 miles per hour, every light in the cab went out. Engine still running, dashboard still glowing, but his headlights died completely, plunging the highway ahead into absolute darkness. He could still see in his mirrors, though. The trailer lights still worked, and in their red glow, he watched the girl in the yellow sundress walk toward his truck. She moved wrong. Her legs bent at angles that didn't match her forward motion, like someone had filmed her walking normally and then corrupted the footage. Each step covered too much ground, eating up the distance between them in lurching, impossible strides. Marcus hammered the accelerator and the headlights blazed back to life. The highway reappeared. The speedometer climbed past 60, past 70. In his mirror, the girl receded into the distance, but she never stopped walking. Never stopped walking in that broken, stuttering way that made his stomach clench. His CB crackled again. "Mile marker 217, always 217, count how many you've passed." Marcus had been counting, 43. He'd passed the same mile marker 43 times. The Amarillo exit sign appeared ahead again, and this time Marcus made a decision. He cranked the wheel hard, taking the exit ramp at 70 miles per hour, his Jake brake screaming as he fought to slow the 40,000-pound load. The Peterbilt shuddered, trailer wheels howling, but he made the curve. The exit ramp climbed for exactly 12 seconds, then curved back and merged onto Interstate 40 westbound. The exact same stretch of highway. Mile marker 217 appeared in his headlights. He tried the next exit. Same result. 12 seconds of climbing, a curve, and back onto the endless westbound lane. His fuel gauge now read completely full, and the digital clock showed 10:38 p.m. He'd been driving backward through time for over an hour, and every loop took him further from where he'd started. That's when Marcus noticed the cargo. He was hauling a reefer trailer, refrige. Rated the kind that kept produce fresh or pharmaceuticals stable. His manifest said he was carrying frozen vegetables from a processing plant in Oklahoma to a distribution center in Flagstaff. 28 pallets of mixed vegetables, 40,000 pounds total weight. He'd loaded it himself, watched the forklift operators stack every pallet. But his reefer unit had gone silent. The constant diesel thrum of the refrigeration compressor, the sound that was so familiar it became white noise after 17 years, had stopped. He couldn't say when. Could have been 5 minutes ago, could have been when this whole nightmare started. The temperature gauge for the trailer still glowed on his dashboard, reading 32 degrees Fahrenheit exactly, but the unit itself was quiet as a tomb. Marcus pulled the trailer brake and brought the Peterbilt to a stop on the shoulder. His CB radio immediately began screaming, his own voice howling in wordless terror, but he ignored it. Some part of him understood that whatever was happening, the cargo in his trailer was the answer, or the question, or the reason he couldn't leave this impossible loop of highway. He grabbed his flashlight from the sleeper berth and stepped down from the cab. The night air hit him like a physical force, cold enough to burn his lungs despite the manifest temperature reading 68 degrees when he'd fueled up in Shamrock. His breath came out in great white clouds, and the highway beneath his boots was slick with frost that had appeared in the seconds since he'd stopped. The girl in the yellow sundress stood 20 feet in front of his truck. She didn't move now, just watched him with eyes that reflected his flashlight beam like a cat's, yellow and bright. Her sundress hung perfectly still despite the wind that howled across the empty plains, and when Marcus's light swept over her face, he saw that her smile was too wide, stretching well past where the corners of her mouth should end. "You have to check the trailer," she said, and her voice was his voice, the same voice that had been crackling through his CB radio. Marcus backed toward the rear of his trailer, keeping his flashlight trained on the girl. She didn't follow, didn't move at all except for her smile, which seemed to widen further, the corners now reaching back toward her ears. His free hand found the latch on the trailer door, and the metal was so cold it stuck to his palm, ripping away a layer of skin when he jerked back. He yanked the door handle. The trailer doors swung open, and refrigerated air rolled out, carrying a smell that made Marcus's gorge rise, not the clean, sterile cold of frozen vegetables. This was the sweet-rot stench of old meat, of something that had been dead for a while and kept just cold enough to slow the decay but not stop it. His flashlight beam penetrated maybe 15 feet into the trailer before the darkness seemed to swallow the light. He could see the pallets stacked in neat rows, shrink-wrapped and labeled, exactly as they should be, except the shrink wrap was moving, bulging, and contracting like the pallets were breathing. Marcus forced himself to climb up into the trailer. The metal floor groaned under his weight, and his boots stuck slightly with each step, like walking across flypaper. His flashlight swept across the first pallet, and through the clouded plastic shrink wrap, he could see shapes that were definitely not frozen vegetables. They were faces, dozens of them pressed against the inside of the shrink wrap, mouths open in silent screams. Some were fresh enough that he could see details, eyes wide with terror, skin pale with death. Others had deteriorated to skulls with scraps of tissue clinging to bone. And they were still moving, still pressing against the plastic like they were trying to break free. Every pallet was the same, not vegetables, bodies. Hundreds of bodies wrapped and stacked and frozen, and every single face was his own. Marcus stumbled backward, and his flashlight beam swung wild, illuminating the far end of the trailer. A figure stood there, backlit by some impossible light source that didn't exist. The figure was tall, maybe 7 feet, and it wore what looked like a trucker's jacket and cap. But where its face should be, there was only a smooth expanse of skin, unmarked except for a mouth that opened vertically instead of horizontally, lined with what looked like truck gear teeth. "You've been driving this route for 17 years, the thing said, and its voice came from everywhere and nowhere, resonating in Marcus's bones. Every week the same route, loading the same cargo, delivering the same payload. Did you never wonder where it came from? What happened to the Marcus Holloway who drove this route before you, or the one before him?" Marcus couldn't move. His legs refused to obey, and his flashlight had fallen from his hand, rolling across the trailer floor to illuminate the thing's feet. Except, it didn't have feet. It had wheels, truck wheels, and the trailer floor beneath it was worn smooth in 2 parallel tracks where it had paced back and forth for God knew how long. "Every loop brings more," the thing continued. "Every time you pass mile marker 217, another you dies somewhere else in the timeline, and we collect them. We've been collecting for decades, centuries, Every driver who takes this route, every Marcus Holloway who thinks he's just hauling frozen vegetables across the country. You all end up here eventually. The CB radio in the cab was still screaming, and Marcus finally understood what he was hearing. It wasn't one voice. It was hundreds, thousands, all screaming in unison, every Marcus Holloway who had driven this route and ended up wrapped in shrink plastic, stacked on a pallet, frozen in eternal terror. He ran, bolted from the trailer, his boots slipping on the icy floor, and slammed the doors shut behind him. The latch clicked, and for a moment blessed silence. Then his own face appeared in the reflection on the polished trailer doors, but it wasn't right. His reflection smiled too wide, corners of the mouth stretching back past his ears, and its eyes glowed yellow in the reflected light from his cab. "You can't leave," his reflection said. "You signed the manifest." Marcus didn't remember climbing back into his cab, didn't remember releasing the trailer brake or shifting into gear. He only knew he was driving again, accelerating past 80, past 90, the Peterbilt screaming down Interstate 40 westbound. The girl in the yellow sundress stood on every mile marker now, dozens of her, hundreds, all waving frantically as he passed. His fuel gauge was beyond full now, the needle bent past the maximum reading. His clock showed 8:30 p.m., the exact time he'd fueled up in Shamrock. He was moving backward through his own timeline, approaching the moment when this run had started, and some instinct told him that when he reached that point, the loop would begin again. He would start over, hauling the same cargo, driving the same endless highway, passing the same mile marker forever. Unless he could break the cycle. Marcus grabbed his logbook from the dashboard, the physical paper version he still kept despite electronic logging devices being mandatory. Every driver had his quirks, and his was maintaining a handwritten record. He flipped through the pages, looking for his entries from tonight, but the pages were wrong. His handwriting filled every line, documenting runs he'd made, cargo he'd hauled, but the dates went back years. Decades. The entries started in 1993, 32 years ago, but the handwriting was unmistakably his. He'd been driving this route for 32 years, not 17. The memories in his head were lies or copies or something worse. Every Marcus Holloway before him had left these entries, and they'd all driven until they became cargo themselves. The Amarillo exit appeared ahead, and Marcus made his choice. He didn't take the exit. Instead, he cranked the wheel hard left and jumped the median, the Peterbilt suspension screaming as all 18 wheels left the pavement. He crossed the westbound lanes, crashed through the far guardrail, and plunged into the darkness beyond the highway. The truck fell, not rolled, not crashed, fell. The ground simply wasn't there, and Marcus found himself in freefall, the Peterbilt and its terrible cargo dropping through an endless void. His headlights illuminated nothing. His CB radio went silent. The only sound was the wind screaming past his windows and the reefer unit, which had started up again, humming its familiar rhythm. He fell for 17 seconds exactly, and then the truck hit something solid. Not ground, not water. Something that gave slightly, like landing on a mattress of human bodies, and the thought made Marcus's skin crawl because he suspected that's exactly what it was. When he kicked open his door and climbed down, his boots sank into a surface that felt like cold flesh. His flashlight revealed that he was no longer on any highway. He stood in what looked like an enormous warehouse, but the walls were too far away to see, and the ceiling was lost in darkness overhead. Around him, stretching in every direction, were trucks. Thousands of them, maybe millions, all identical Peterbilts, all hauling identical reefer trailers. And from every cab, he could hear himself screaming. Marcus walked between the trucks, and each one he passed was the same. Same model year, same paint job, same company logo on the door. Bulldog Express. His company. Except when he'd signed on 17 years ago, or 32 years ago, or however long it had really been, he'd never thought to ask how many drivers worked for Bulldog Express or why they all drove identical routes with identical cargo. A figure stepped out from behind one of the trucks ahead, not the thing from his trailer. A man, middle-aged, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, normal except for the way parts of him seemed to flicker and fade like bad video reception. His face resolved as Marcus approached, and Marcus felt his bladder let go. The man was him. Older, maybe 60, with more gray in his hair and deeper lines around his eyes, but unmistakably Marcus Holloway. "Loop number 4073, the older Marcus said. "You lasted longer than most. Usually they stop the truck when they see the girl. You made it almost 5 hours before checking the cargo." "What is this?" Marcus's voice came out as a whisper. "What the fuck is this?" "Bulldog Express isn't a trucking company," the older Marcus said. "It's a harvesting operation. We drive the routes forever, collecting ourselves from every timeline where we made the mistake of signing on. Every time you deliver your cargo and start a new run, another version of you from another timeline enters the loop. You build up, like interest in a savings account. Eventually, there's enough of you to fill the trailer, and you become the cargo you've been hauling." Why? Marcus felt tears streaming down his face, hot against his cold skin. Why me? Why any of this? The older Marcus smiled, and it was the too-wide smile of the girl in the yellow sundress, the smile of his reflection in the trailer doors. Because you keep agreeing to drive. Every timeline, every version, you see the ad for Bulldog Express, you think the money looks good, and you sign the contract. You manifest your own destruction with every signature. Marcus ran. He didn't know where he was running, but he couldn't stand there looking at what he would become. His boots splashed through something wet on the floor, and when he looked down, he saw that the entire warehouse was covered in a thin layer of fluid that might have been water or might have been something worse. His flashlight caught movement in the liquid, shapes swimming beneath the surface, and he forced himself not to think about what they might be. He found another truck and climbed into the cab, hoping stupidly that it might be different, that it might offer escape. The keys were in the ignition, and when he turned them, the engine roared to life. The dashboard lit up, fuel gauge showing 3/4 full, clock reading 11:47 p.m. The CB radio crackled. "You can't escape by finding a different truck," his own voice said through the static. "They're all the same truck. You're just moving between moments in the loop, not escaping it." Marcus keyed the radio anyway. "How do I stop this? How do I get out?" Silence for a long moment, then a response that wasn't his voice. It was something older, something that hurt to hear, like listening to a voice made of grinding metal and breaking bones. "You don't. You never did. You never will. The loop is eternal and you are the cargo." The warehouse around him began to change. The walls moved closer, or maybe the truck was moving toward them. It was impossible to tell. The darkness overhead descended, pressing down, and Marcus realized the ceiling was made of the same shrink-wrapped pallets he'd seen in his trailer. Faces pressed against the plastic, all his own, all screaming silently. He slammed the truck into gear and drove. There was no road, but the truck moved anyway, splashing through the fluid on the floor, weaving between the infinite rows of identical vehicles. His headlights caught glimpses of other figures moving between the trucks, all wearing trucker gear, all with faces that flickered between familiar and strange. A gap appeared ahead, a space between the warehouses that looked like it might lead somewhere else. Marcus aimed for it, accelerating, the speedometer climbing past 100. The gap grew closer, and through it he could see lights. Highway lights. Interstate 40 stretching westbound under a clear night sky. He was going to make it. He was going to escape back onto the highway, back to reality, back to a world where physics worked correctly and mile markers advanced sequentially and cargo stayed dead. The gap was right there, 30 feet away, 2010. Mile marker 217 appeared in his headlights. The truck emerged onto Interstate 40 westbound, and Marcus's fuel gauge read 3/4 full. His clock showed 11:47 p.m. His CB radio crackled with his own voice asking for road conditions ahead, and then screaming. The Amarillo exit sign appeared in the distance. Marcus began to laugh high and wild because he finally understood. There had never been a warehouse. There had never been a gap or an escape. He'd been driving in the loop the entire time, and every second he thought he was experiencing something new, but it was all the same moment, stretched and distorted and folded back on itself. He reached for his logbook again, but his hands found something else on the dashboard. A manifest, the original manif. Est for his cargo, the one he'd signed in Shamrock at 8:30 p.m. when he'd loaded his trailer. He unfolded it with shaking hands. The cargo description read, Marcus Holloway, quantity, infinite. Destination, mile marker 217 I-40 westbound. Delivery instructions, continue driving until delivery is complete. He'd signed it. His signature was right there at the bottom, just above the company representative's signature, which was also his own. The girl in the yellow sundress appeared in his passenger seat. Not outside on the highway, not in his mirror. Sitting right next to him, her too-wide smile reflecting the dashboard lights. She smelled like the inside of his trailer, like cold meat and decay and eternity. "You're doing great," she said in his voice. Only 4,072 more loops until you're ready. Ready for what? She pointed ahead and Marcus followed her gesture. In the distance, maybe a mile up the highway, he could see a truck stopped on the shoulder. A Peterbilt 379, identical to his own. The driver was climbing down from the cab, flashlight in hand, walking toward the rear of his trailer. Ready to help the next you understand, the girl said. The loop needs guides, it needs voices on the CB radio, it needs girls in yellow sundresses to warn and lure and teach. You'll join us soon. You'll become part of the harvesting mechanism, and you'll do it forever because the contract says so. Marcus looked at his hands on the steering wheel and saw they were beginning to fade, becoming transparent, flickering like bad video reception. He could see the steering wheel through his palms, could see the highway through his forearms. He was becoming something else, something that existed between moments, between timelines, between the infinite versions of himself that had signed the Bulldog Express contract and started driving westbound. The mile marker 217 appeared again. He'd stopped counting how many times he'd passed it. The number didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered except the endless westbound lane and the cargo in his trailer and the gradual fading of everything he'd thought was real. His CB radio crackled one more time. Breaker 19, this is Bulldog Express, anybody out there? Marcus recognized the voice. It was his own, but younger from maybe an hour ago, from a version of himself that had just entered the loop. He reached for the radio, and his transparent hand passed through it on the first try, but on the second attempt he managed to grip the microphone. Don't stop driving, Marcus heard himself say through the speaker. If you stop, you'll see what's in the mirrors. The girl in the yellow sundress smiled wider, and Marcus understood that he'd just spoken his first words as a guide, his first contribution to the harvesting mechanism. He was becoming part of the loop, part of the eternal machinery that fed on drivers and cargo and time itself. His truck faded around him, becoming transparent, and Marcus realized he was no longer driving. He was standing on the shoulder of Interstate 40 westbound, wearing a yellow sundress that whipped in the wind from passing trucks. His smile stretched too wide, corners reaching back past his ears, and his eyes glowed yellow in the wash of approaching headlights. A Peterbilt 379 roared past, and in the driver's seat, Marcus could see himself, younger, terrified, accelerating away from the thing he'd become. Marcus began to wave both arms over his head, frantic, desperate, warning the next version of himself about what was coming. But he knew it wouldn't matter. It never mattered. The driver would stop to check his cargo eventually. They always did. And the loop would continue, westbound forever, past mile marker 217 into infinity. Story 2, The Voice in the Sleeper Berth. Diane Reyes woke to the sound of her own breathing coming from somewhere behind her head, and the air in her sleeper berth tasted like copper and fear. She'd parked her Freightliner Cascadia at a rest stop outside Winnemucca, Nevada, 4 hours ago to grab mandatory sleep before pushing through to Sacramento. But the breathing that wasn't hers continued even after she held her breath to confirm it. Someone was in the berth with her. Impossible because she'd locked both doors, because the sleeper compartment was barely 6 feet long and she would have felt another body. But the breathing persisted, wet and ragged, so close she could feel moisture against her neck. Diane didn't move. 17 years of solo hauling had taught her that panic killed more efficiently than whatever caused it. She kept her eyes closed and cataloged what her other senses told her. The breathing was definitely behind her, maybe inches from her head. The temperature in the berth had dropped enough that she could see her breath when she'd climbed in 4 hours ago, and now her sleeping bag felt damp with condens. Ation that shouldn't exist, and underneath the breathing she could hear words. Not words exactly, more like the echo of words or the memory of someone speaking played backward and slowed down until the syllables became something else entirely. They resonated in her bones rather than her ears, and they were saying her name. Diane, 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 over and over in a voice that might have been male or female or neither, but was definitely not human. She opened her eyes to darkness so complete it had texture, pressing against her face like a physical thing. Her sleeper berth had a small lead light strip that stayed on all night, burning off her battery bank, but now there was nothing. Not even the faint glow from her dashboard instruments leaking through the privacy curtain. Just absolute darkness and the breathing and the voice calling her name. Diane's hand crept toward the curtain that separated the sleeper from the cab. Her fingers found fabric and she pulled it aside. The cab was visible through the gap, illuminated by the rest stop's sodium lights filtering through the windshield. Empty. Normal. She could see her coffee cup still sitting in the holder, her logbook on the dashboard where she'd left it, the GPS unit showing her location outside Winnemucca. The breathing behind her stopped. "Found you," the voice said, clear now, no longer distorted. It came from directly behind her ear, breath hot against her skin despite the freezing temperature. "Been looking for 347 nights. Finally found the right truck." Diane rolled out of the sleeping bag and through the curtain in one motion, muscle memory from too many rough truck stop encounters overriding her fear. She landed in the driver's seat, hands already reaching for the ignition, but stopped when she saw her reflection in the driver's side window. The thing behind her was visible in the reflection, though nothing was actually in the cab with her. It looked like a person-shaped void, a space where reality had been scooped out, and inside that void were lights, not stars. These were the wrong color, too red, and they moved like eyes tracking her motion. There were dozens of them, hundreds maybe, all watching her from inside the absence where a person should be. "You can't see me unless you use a mirror," the void said. Its voice came from everywhere now, vibrating through the cab. "I don't exist in primary space anymore, haven't for a long time, but I can still reach through when someone parks in the right spot at the right time. 347 nights I've been trying. You're the first driver to stop here at exactly 2:43 a.m. on a night when the barriers are thin enough." Diane's fingers found her phone. No signal, but the time read 2:43 a.m. exactly. The battery indicator showed 8%, but she'd plugged it in to charge hours ago. The screen flickered, and for a moment her phone's camera view activated, showing the cab behind her. The void thing was clearer through the camera, and Diane felt her stomach lurch because now she could see what the lights were. They were the high beams and running lights of trucks. Dozens of semi-trucks, all different makes and models, all driving through the impossible space inside the void. They weren't toy-sized or distant. They were full-scale, 40,000-pound vehicles moving at highway speed, and they were inside something that occupied the same space as her cab. One of the trucks in the void honked, and the sound came from her own horn mounted on her Cascadia's roof. Then another honked, and another until all of them were blaring in a cacophony that made Diane's ears ring. But outside her truck, the rest stop remained silent. An RV was parked 3 spots down, lights off, undisturbed. "I used to be like you," the void said. "Name was Thomas Ashford. Drove a 96 Kenworth W900 beautiful truck, pulled refrigerated trailers up and down I-80 for 11 years. Until I parked here one night, same rest stop, same time, August 14th, 2009. 16 years ago now. I thought I saw something outside, got out to check, and I fell through." Diane forced herself to look away from her phone to focus on the windshield ahead. The rest stop was still there, concrete and asphalt and the harsh wash of sodium lights. Normal. Real. But in her peripheral vision, in every reflective surface, the void remained, crowded with its impossible cargo of trucks. Fell through what? She didn't want to engage, didn't want to acknowledge that this was happening, but some instinct told her that silence would be worse. "The spaces between miles," Thomas Ashford said. "You know how sometimes you're driving and you realize you don't remember the last 10, 20 miles, like your brain was on autopilot and you snapped back to awareness. Everyone thinks that's just highway hypnosis, but it's not. Those miles still happened. You sent. Ill drove them, but you weren't fully there. You were slightly out of phase with reality, existing in the gap between where you were and where you're going." The void shifted, and through her phone's camera, Diane watched the trucks inside it change direction, all of them turning to face her. Their headlights grew brighter, and she could see silhouettes in the driver's seats. People-shaped, but wrong. Too tall, or with too many arms, or with heads that bent at angles that would snap a human neck. "I fell into one of those gaps and couldn't find my way back out," Thomas continued. "Been driving through the in-between ever since. It's not empty here. There are others, hundreds of us, maybe thousands. All drivers who parked at the wrong place at the wrong time and slipped through the cracks in the highway. We exist between destinations, forever en route, never arriving." Diane's hand closed around her key fob. The engine start button glowed blue on her dash, inviting, promising escape. But every instinct she'd developed over 17 years of driving told her that starting the truck would be a mistake. Some quality in the air had changed, become heavier, like the atmospheric pressure before a storm. "What do you want?" she asked. The void laughed, and the sound came from her CB radio, her phone, her stereo system all at once. "I want you to drive. Start your truck and get back on I-80 westbound. Because where you're parked right now, you're standing on a weak point, a place where the gap between miles is so thin I can almost push through. And if you drive away, you'll take me with you. I'll be in your mirrors, in your reflections, riding in your blind spots. Eventually, you'll get tired, you'll zone out for a few seconds, and when you come back to yourself, you'll be here with me, between miles, forever. Diane looked at her phone again. 5% battery now, and the time hadn't advanced. Still 2:43 a.m. She pulled up her recent calls and saw that the last person she'd spoken to was herself, her own number, a 3-hour conversation that she had no memory of having. When she checked her voicemail, there was one new message. She played it. Her own voice filled the cab, but older, exhausted, speaking words she'd never said. "This is Diane Reyes, whoever you are. I'm leaving this message from somewhere between Winnemucca and Sacramento. I've been driving for what feels like 17 years, but my odometer says it's been 17,000. My logbook pages never run out, and I haven't needed to fuel up in longer than I can remember. If you're hearing this, you're either me from before I fell through, or you're the next driver about to make the same mistake I did. Don't engage. Don't acknowledge. Whatever's in your mirrors isn't." The message cut off with a sound like a semi-truck jackknifing, metal screaming and glass shattering. Diane deleted the message with shaking fingers. Her battery was at 2%. Outside, the sodium lights flickered, and in that moment of darkness, she saw them. Dozens of semi-trucks surrounding her Cascadia, all parked nose-in like they were watching her. They were visible only when the lights went out, existing in the darkness between pulses of illumination. And they were all identical models. All Freightliner Cascadias, same year as hers, same company logo on the doors. Pacific Northwest Distribution, her company, her trucks. "You've been here before," Thomas Ashford said, and now his voice came from her own throat, using her vocal cords to form words she didn't choose to speak. "Not you specifically, versions of you. Every time a Diane Reyes driving for Pacific Northwest Distribution parks at this rest stop at 2:43 a.m., another one slips through. You're the 37th. I've been counting." Diane bit down hard on her tongue, filling her mouth with blood, trying to regain control of her own voice. She succeeded, but only partially. When she spoke, the words came out doubled, her voice and Thomas's overlapping. "Get out of my truck." "I'm not in your truck," he said through her mouth. "I'm in your reflection. I'm in the space between who you are and who you're seeing in the mirror. And unless you can figure out how to exist without casting a reflection, I'm not going anywhere." Her battery hit 1% and the phone screen showed a new notification, a calendar reminder scheduled for today. "Winnemucca rest stop 2:43 a.m. Do not stop here. You've warned yourself about this 36 times. You never listen." Diane stared at the notification. She didn't remember creating it, didn't remember warning herself. But the alert was there, scheduled with her personal calendar app, using her login credentials. She scrolled through her calendar history and found 36 identical reminders, all created at exactly 2:43 a.m. on different nights over the past 4 years, all warning her about this rest stop. She'd stopped anyway. Every time. And every time, a version of her had fallen through into the gaps between miles, and those versions had tried to warn the next iteration. 37 times now, the cycle had repeated. Her phone died. The screen went black, and in its reflection, Diane saw herself sitting in the driver's seat, mouth open, eyes wide with terror. But behind her reflection, deeper in the screen's black mirror, she saw the other Dianes. 36 of them, all sitting in identical poses, all staring out from their own reflections, all trying to warn her. The sodium lights flickered again, staying dark longer this time. In the darkness, the trucks surrounding her Cascadia were completely visible. They were all occupied now, all those identical Cascadias, and in each driver's seat sat a Diane Reyes. Some looked fresh, recently fallen. Others were desiccated, little more than mummified corpses gripping steering wheels, and all of them were driving, even though their trucks were parked. Their hands moved, their feet worked the pedals, their eyes tracked motion on highways that didn't exist. "You're wondering if you can just leave," Thomas said, still using her voice. "Walk away from the truck, call for help, wait until sunrise when the barriers thicken again. Good instinct, wrong conclusion, watch." Diane felt her body move without her permission. Her hand reached for the door handle, pulled it, and the door swung open. She stepped down from the cab, her legs moving mechanically, puppeted by something wearing her reflection. Her boots hit the asphalt and the ground felt wrong, too soft, like walking on skin instead of pavement. She looked down, the asphalt was breathing. Not heaving or buckling, breathing. She could see it expand and contract, could feel it warm and cool in rhythm with respiration. The white parking lines painted on the surface moved like veins, pulsing with something that might have been blood or might have been highway paint given terrible life. "The rest stop isn't real anymore," Thomas explained through her mouth. "Hasn't been since the first driver fell through back in '93. Now it's just a lure, a thin spot that looks real enough to fool people into stopping. But everything here exists between miles, between moments, even the ground beneath your feet." Diane tried to run. Her legs responded this time, but when she looked up, the rest stop's exit was gone. Not blocked, not closed. Simply absent, like someone had erased it from reality. The rest stop stretched endlessly in all directions now, filled with thousands of parked trucks, all Cascadias, all containing Diane Rays in various states of decay. And they were all staring at her. Every version of herself in every truck had turned to watch. Some of the fresher ones were crying, pounding on their windows, mouthing warnings. The older ones just watched with empty sockets, their bodies dried and preserved by the weird physics of the space between miles. "The gap feeds on routine," Thomas said. "On drivers who take the same routes, park at the same stops, maintain the same schedules. It uses that predictability to widen itself, to create thin spots where it can reach through. You've driven I-80 for 17 years. Same route, same stops, same schedule. You've worn a groove in reality through sheer repetition, and now the groove has become deep enough to fall into." Diane's hand moved to her belt, where she kept a folding knife for cutting straps and opening stubborn packaging. Her fingers closed around it, and she felt a moment of hope. If Thomas was controlling her through her reflection, maybe destroying the reflective surfaces would break his hold. Her windshield, her mirrors, her phone screen. She opened the knife and the blade caught the flickering sodium light. In its polished surface, she saw Thomas clearly for the first time. He wasn't a void anymore. He was a man, middle-aged, wearing a grimy t-shirt and jeans, with eyes that had seen too many impossible miles. And behind him, she saw his truck, the '96 Kenworth he'd mentioned, parked among all the Cascadias. "Breaking mirrors won't help," Thomas said gently, and his tone had changed. Not hostile anymore, sympathetic. "I tried that, shattered every reflective surface in my truck, even scratched out my own eyes so I couldn't see my reflection in water. But the gap doesn't need mirrors to hold you. Mirrors just make it easier to see what's already there. You're already fallen, Diane, have been since you parked. Now we're just waiting for you to realize it." Diane stabbed the knife into her palm, driving the blade through her hand until it punched out the back. Pain exploded through her arm, hot and bright and real. Blood welled around the blade, dripping onto the breathing asphalt, and where it landed, the ground screamed. Not metaphorically. The pavement opened tiny mouths and shrieked, high and piercing, and the sound shattered every window in every true. CK simultaneously. Glass rained down in glittering cascades, and for a moment all the reflective surfaces were gone. Thomas's presence vanished from her voice. Diane yanked the knife free and ran for her Cascadia, blood spattering behind her. She hauled herself into the cab, slammed the door, and hit the engine start button. The diesel engine roared to life, the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard, and she slammed the transmission into gear. The Cascadia lurched forward, tires screeching on the screaming pavement. She aimed for where the exit should be, where it had to be, because rest stops didn't just lose their exits. But instead of finding the ramp back to I-80, her headlights revealed something else. A wall, not concrete or metal. A wall made of compressed highway, layers of asphalt and white lines and yellow dividers all crushed together into a vertical surface that stretched up past the reach of her headlights. And embedded in the wall were vehicles. Thousands of them, semi-trucks and cars and motorcycles, all pressed flat like insects in amber, their metal frames squeezed paper-thin. Diane cranked the wheel and accelerated parallel to the wall, searching for a gap, an opening, anything. Her wounded hand left blood all over the steering wheel, and her speedometer climbed past 60, past 70, the Cascadia screaming across the impossible rest stop. She passed 1,000 trucks, 10,000. They blurred together into an endless field of identical Cascadias, and in her remaining mirror, the passenger side, its glass somehow intact despite the shattering, she saw them all starting their engines, every single one. The sound was deafening, 1,000 diesel engines roaring to life in unison. And then they moved, all of them simultaneously, falling in behind her Cascadia in a convoy that stretched back to infinity. They matched her speed exactly, maintaining perfect following distance, their headlights turning the darkness behind her into blazing noon. You can't escape by driving, Thomas's voice said from her CB radio. The glass face of the radio was shattered, but somehow it still worked. The gap is infinite in all directions, but you can go deeper. Drive fast enough, far enough, and you'll punch through into the underlayers, the spaces beneath the space between miles. I don't know what's down there. None of us who have tried have ever come back. Diane floored the accelerator. 80 miles per hour. 90, 100. The Cascadia's frame shook, components never designed for this speed beginning to fail. Behind her, the convoy of dead Dianes matched her pace, 1,000 ghosts driving in perfect formation. Ahead, the breathing asphalt began to crack. Not from the weight of her truck, but from the speed, like she was moving fast enough to tear through the fabric of the false rest stop. The cracks spread, widening, and beneath them, Diane glimpsed something else. Highway, real highway, I-80 stretching westbound under a clear night sky. It was beneath the rest stop, below the layer of reality she'd been trapped in, visible through the spreading cracks like ocean glimpsed through melting ice. She aimed for the largest crack and hit it at 110 miles per hour. The Cascadia dropped, falling through the break in the false rest stop, and Diane felt her stomach lurch as gravity reasserted itself. The convoy followed, 1,000 trucks plunging through the crack behind her. They fell for 17 seconds exactly, and then the Cascadia's wheels hit solid pavement with a crunch that bent her frame and blew out 3 tires. The truck slewed sideways, trailer jackknifing, and Diane fought the wheel as 40,000 pounds of momentum tried to rip itself apart. She brought it under control through sheer muscle and 17 years of experience, getting the Cascadia stopped on the shoulder before the trailer could tip. Behind her, the convoy emerged from the crack, but they weren't trucks anymore. They were light, pure blazing light, 37 points of illumination that hovered above the highway for a moment before winking out one by one. Diane sat in her ruined cab, breathing hard, her wounded hand throbbing. Real pain, real blood, real highway beneath her blown tires. She could see mile marker 298 ahead, I-80 westbound, exactly where it should be. Normal, real. Her CB radio crackled, speaker damaged but functional. Thomas Ashford's voice came through, faint and distant. You made it, you actually. None of the others even tried. They just accepted it became part of the gap, but you drove through. I don't know if that means you're free or if you've just found a deeper layer of the trap. Either way, good luck, Diane, and if you ever figure out how to really escape, how to break the cycle completely, come back for the rest of us. We're still here. We'll always be here, between miles, waiting. The radio died with a pop of sparking electronics. Dia. Nee climbed down from her cab on shaking legs. 3 trucks were approaching from the west, their headlights visible miles away. Real trucks, driven by real people existing in the real world. She'd never been so happy to see other traffic. She pulled out her phone to call for roadside assistance, and the screen lit up despite having died earlier. 100% battery. The time read 2:43 a.m. exactly, same as when she'd first woken to the breathing in her sleeper berth. And there was a new calendar reminder scheduled for 1 year from today. Same rest stop, same time. The message read, "You'll stop here again, you always do. Warn yourself better this time." Diane stared at the reminder, then at her palm. The knife wound was gone, not healed, not scarred. Gone like it had never happened. But her hand was still covered in blood, and she could see the smears all over her steering wheel through the cab window. The first of the approaching trucks pulled onto the shoulder ahead of her, air brakes hissing. The driver climbed down, a middle-aged woman wearing a company jacket, and Diane felt relief flood through her. Help, someone real. The woman walked into the wash of Diane's headlights, and Diane saw her face clearly. Middle-aged, weathered by years of long hauls, with eyes that tracked the highway with practiced vigilance. It was her own face, 20 years older. "You're doing great," the older Diane said. "Made it further than I did on my 37th loop, but you'll stop at that rest stop again in a year. You always do. The gap has worn a groove in your timeline and you can't help but follow it. I'm you from loop 83. I've been trying to break the cycle for 46 years now, haven't managed it yet." Diane tried to run, but her legs wouldn't move. She looked down and saw that she was standing on asphalt that was breathing, expanding and contracting in steady rhythm. The highway was breathing. It had always been breathing. She just hadn't noticed before. "You're not on I-80, the older Diane said gently. "You fell through just like Thomas said. What you think is the real highway is just another layer of the gap, slightly closer to reality but still not real. You'll drive it for another year thinking you've escaped, and then you'll park at that rest stop at exactly 2:43 a.m. and you'll start the cycle again, deeper each time. There's no bottom. The gap goes down forever. Diane screamed, and her voice echoed across the breathing highway. In the distance, she could see other trucks stopped on the shoulder, dozens of them, hundreds, all Freightliner Cascadias, all containing versions of herself spread across different loops, different layers of the gap. And above it all, she could hear Thomas Ashford's voice, crackling through every CB radio simultaneously. Welcome to the spaces between miles. Population, everyone who ever thought they were just parking for a quick rest. Drive safe out there. And remember, your next stop is already scheduled. Diane climbed back into her Cascadia, started the engine with her bloodless hand, and pulled back onto the highway. Because what else could she do? She was a trucker. She had deliveries to make, miles to cover, a schedule to maintain. The highway stretched ahead, westbound forever, and every mile marker showed the same number, 243. She kept driving anyway. Behind her, in her one intact mirror, 37 other Cascadias fell in line, matching her speed exactly. The convoy of her own ghosts, following her deeper into the gaps between miles. And somewhere ahead, she knew, another rest stop was waiting. Same time, same place, 1 year from now in a timeline that looped back on itself like a Möbius strip. She'd stop there, she always did. The gap had infinite patience. Story 3, the load that got heavier. Rafael Santos felt the trailer's weight increase by exactly 2 tons between mile marker 312 and 313 on Interstate 95 southbound through Maine, and his electronic logging device registered the change as a fault code that couldn't exist. The additional weight appeared instantaneously. No gradual increase, just 44,000 pounds becoming 48,000 pounds in the space of a single mile. He'd been hauling this load of furniture from a distribution center in Presque Isle to a showroom in Providence for 8 hours, and his tandem axle weights had been legal and stable the entire trip. But now his Volvo VNL's suspension groaned under strain it hadn't been designed to handle, and when Raphael checked his tandems in the mirror, he could see the trailer tires compressing, sidewalls bulging dangerously. The thing that made his scalp prickle with instinctive horror was the fault code on his dashboard display. Cargo violation, spontaneous mass generation, biological load detected, no biological load authorized. Raphael had been driving for 23 years. RS, he knew every fault code in the manual, every error message that could appear on his electronic logs. This wasn't one of them. This shouldn't exist in the system's programming. He pulled onto the shoulder, hazards flashing, and climbed down with his flashlight. 3 in the morning on a Tuesday, traffic sparse enough that he could hear his own heartbeat over the idling diesel. His breath came out in white clouds, temperature barely above freezing, and his boots crunched on frost-covered gravel. The trailer looked normal from the outside. 53-foot dry van, unmarked white, same as when he'd loaded it 9 hours ago. He'd watched the warehouse crew stack the pallets himself, 40 skids of bedroom furniture wrapped tight in shrink wrap. Dressers, nightstands, bed frames. Nothing that could spontaneously generate 2 tons of additional weight. Raphael walked the length of the trailer, checking the sides for damage or signs of intrusion. Nothing. The security seal on the rear doors was intact, the numbered tag showing no signs of tampering. He pressed his ear against the metal side panel and listened. Something inside was moving. Not the settling creak of shifting cargo. This was deliberate movement, rhythmic like something pacing back and forth. Heavy footsteps, multiple sets, walking in synchronized patterns. And underneath the footsteps he heard breathing. Not one person. Many, dozens, maybe hundreds, all breathing in perfect unison. Raphael's hand shook as he pulled out his phone. No signal, which made no sense because he'd been texting his dispatcher 20 minutes ago. The screen showed 4 bars of nothing, a tower icon with a red X through it. But when he opened his photo gallery, he found 17 new pictures that he hadn't taken. They were all interior shots of his trailer. Someone, or something, had taken photos from inside the sealed cargo space within the last hour, and each photo showed the same thing. The furniture was still there, stacked as it should be, but between the pallets there were people. Not whole people, parts of people. Arms grew from the walls, legs descended from the ceiling, torsos emerged from the floor. They were all connected to the trailer itself, growing from its metal surfaces like tumors, and in the photos, Raphael could see them moving. Fingers flexing, toes curling, chests expanding with breath. The people were alive, or something like alive, and they were part of his trailer now. The 17th photo showed the rear doors from inside, and in the bottom corner, Raphael could see his own face looking in through the window. Except he wasn't at the window yet. The photo was time-stamped 3 minutes into the future. His phone's timer hit the timestamp, and Raphael heard the lock on the trailer doors click open from the inside. He ran, didn't think, didn't analyze, just ran for his cab as the trailer doors swung open behind him with a metallic squeal. His boots slipped on the frost, and he went down hard on one knee, pain shooting up his leg. When he looked back, the trailer's interior was dark, lit only by the red glow of his marker lights. The furniture was still there, but so were the people. They filled every space between the pallets, dozens of human figures grown into the trailer like they'd always been part of it. Some were nearly complete, full bodies with faces and limbs. Others were just fragments, a torso here, a head there, arms reaching out from impossible angles, and they were all looking at him. Raphael scrambled to his feet and hauled himself into the cab. He slammed the door, locked it, and reached for his radio. The CB crackled with his own voice, but the words were wrong, spoken in a language he didn't understand. When he keyed the mic to speak, the language came out of his mouth too, syllables that hurt his throat to form. His electronic logging device had changed. The screen no longer showed his hours of service or his current location. Instead, it displayed a single message updating in real time. Current cargo, 48,000 lbs. Current souls, 137. Integration, 23% complete. Estimated time to full capacity, 4 hours 17 minutes. Raphael shifted into gear and pulled back onto I-95, accelerating hard. He had to get to the next town, had to find help, had to get this thing off his truck. But when he checked his GPS, all the upcoming exits had vanished from the display. The highway stretched ahead with no off-ramps, no rest stops, no services, just miles and miles of empty road. His mirror showed the trailer doors still hanging open, and in their frame the people things had begun to move. They crawled from between the pallets, their movements jerky and wrong, like puppets operated by someone learning how limbs worked. Some pulled themselves along with arms that bent backward, others rolled on spines that had too many vertebrae. And they were smiling, every single one, identical two-wide grins that showed too many teeth. Raphael floored the accelerator, the Volvo's engine screaming as it pushed past 80 miles per hour. The trailer swayed behind him, unstable with the unbalanced load, but he kept the hammer down. Behind him, the people things reached the edge of the trailer opening, and for a moment he thought they might fall out, might tumble onto the highway and end this nightmare. Instead, they began to pull the trailer itself inside out. Their hands grabbed the edges of the door frame and pulled, and the metal peeled back like skin, revealing that the trailer's interior was much larger than its exterior dimensions. Impossibly large. Raphael's 53-foot trailer contained what looked like a warehouse, acres of space filled with furniture and the growing bodies of hundreds of people. The weight increased again, 4,000 pounds this time, appearing in a single instant. His suspension bottomed out, sending sparks flying as his trailer frame scraped the pavement. The electronic log updated. Current cargo, 52,000 lbs. Current souls, 224. Integration, 39% complete. Raphael grabbed his phone and called 911. The call connected, and a dispatcher answered immediately. 911, what's your emergency? I'm a trucker on I-95 southbound, mile marker 320-something. There's something wrong with my trailer. There are people. We know Mr. Santos, the dispatcher said, and the voice was his own. Not similar, not an imitation. His exact voice, down to the slight hoarseness from years of diesel fumes. You've been carrying them since Presqu'Isle. They were in the furniture when you loaded it, just dormant. The vibration of the highway woke them up, and now they're integrating with your cargo. It's what they do. It's what they've always done. What the fuck are they? Raphael screamed into the phone. The spaces between things, his own voice answered calmly. When furniture is manufactured, there are gaps. Between the wood fibers, between the particles of laminate, between the molecules of varnish. Those gaps usually stay empty, but sometimes something else finds its way in. Something that exists in the spaces between matter, and it grows there, feeding on the potential energy of all the lives that will eventually use that furniture. You're not hauling dressers and nightstands, Raphael. You're hauling incubators. Raphael threw the phone across the cab. It hit the passenger window and cracked the glass, but he heard his own voice continuing to speak from the shattered device. They're almost ready to emerge. Another few hours and they'll have consumed enough of the furniture to manifest completely. Then they'll need a new space to occupy, something with nice, convenient gaps between components, like, say, a human body. The weight jumped again, 6,000 pounds. Current cargo, 58,000 lbs. Current souls, 389. Integration, 61% complete. Raphael was overweight now, massively overweight, his gross vehicle weight pushing past the 80,000-pound federal limit. If he hit a way station, they'd pull him in, and he had no idea how to explain what was in his trailer. Had no idea how to explain that his cargo was growing people from the spaces between furniture. His GPS updated, showing a way station 5 miles ahead. Open, all trucks must enter. The sign was already visible in his headlights, and Raphael felt his blood turn to ice because that way station hadn't been there on his trip north 2 days ago. It had appeared, or been built, or existed in some space that only became accessible when certain conditions were met. Like when a trailer was carrying exactly 389 souls in the spaces between its cargo. Raphael didn't slow down. He blew past the way station at 90 miles per hour, and in his mirror he saw the scale house lights come on, painting the night in harsh white. A voice crackled through his CB radio, official and cold. Driver of the white 53-foot trailer northbound. I'm southbound, Raphael shouted at the radio, though he hadn't keyed the mic. You are now northbound, the voice continued without acknowledging the interruption. You will proceed to the next exit and return to the way station. Failure to comply will result in intervention. Raphael checked his compass. The needle pointed south, same as it had for the last 8 hours. He was still heading south, had to be. The highway only ran north-south through this part of Maine. But when he looked at the stars through his windshield, they were in the wrong positions. Constellations rotated 90 degrees from where they should be. He was heading east now, or west, or some direction that didn't have a name. The highway had turned without him noticing, or the landscape had rotated around him, or something worse had happened that he couldn't comprehend. The weight jumped again, 8,000 pounds. Current cargo, 66,000 lbs. Current souls, 571. Integration, 82% complete. His suspension couldn't take much more. Raphael could hear metal groaning, welds creaking, components stressed past their failure points. When he checked his mirrors, he saw that his trailer tires were leaving marks on the pavement that looked nothing like rubber. The tracks were wet, glistening in his tail lights, and they steamed in the cold air like they were body temperature. His trailer was bleeding. Not metaphorically. The underside of the trailer dripped fluid that was too red to be hydraulic oil, too thick to be condensation. It pooled on the highway behind him, and in the puddles, Raphael could see reflections that showed things that weren't there. Faces looking up from the blood, mouths moving, screaming silently. He took the next exit, purely by instinct, trying to get off the highway even though every rational part of his brain understood that there was no escape. The exit ramp curved away from I-95, climbing a grade that was too steep, that went on for too long. Raphael's speedometer dropped to 50, 40, 30 as his overloaded truck struggled to climb. The ramp leveled out at the top, and Raphael found himself in a parking lot that stretched to every horizon. Thousands of semi-trucks sat in perfect rows, all of them identical white 53-foot dry vans, all of them facing the same direction. And behind every truck stood its driver, all of them staring at Raphael's Volvo as he pulled into an empty spot. He knew what they wanted without needing to be told. He could feel it, a psychic pressure that built in his skull like an ice cream headache magnified 1,000 times. They wanted him to join them, to take his place in the rows, to open his trailer doors and let the integration complete. Raphael's electronic log updated one final time. Current cargo, 66,000 lbs. Current souls, 571 plus 1 driver. Integration 99% complete. Thank you for your service. His cab doors unlocked from the inside, electronic locks clicking open though he'd never touched them. The door on his driver's side swung open, and Raphael found himself climbing down, boots hitting pavement that was soft and warm, that yielded under his weight like flesh. He walked to the rear of his trailer. The doors were fully open now, and the people things had finished their emergence. They stood in neat rows inside the impossibly large interior, all of them complete now, no longer fragments or partial bodies. They looked almost human, would have passed for human except for the way their skin had a faint wood grain texture, the way their joints moved with the precise tolerance of furniture hardware. One of them stepped forward, and Raphael recognized himself. It was him, exactly him, down to the scar on his left hand from a knife accident 3 years ago. His doppelganger smiled, and the expression was wrong, practiced but not quite right, like an AI-generated face that was slightly off-model. "Thank you for the incubation," his double said. "We've been growing in the spaces between the furniture molecules since it was manufactured, waiting for the right combination of vibration and temperature and time to emerge. The highway provides perfect conditions. The constant motion, the diesel fumes, the electromagnetic fields from all the electronic systems. It's a womb for our kind." Raphael tried to run, but his legs wouldn't obey. He looked down and saw that his boots had sunk into the pavement, the soft surface now wrapped around his ankles like hands. The parking lot was holding him, and when he looked closer, he could see that the ground was covered in faces, thousands of them, all pressed just under the surface. Other drivers in other parking lots, he realized. Everyone who'd ever hauled cargo that had something growing in its spaces. All of them caught, all of them held, all of them becoming part of the system that bred more of the people things. His double reached out and placed a hand on Raphael's shoulder, and where it touched, Raphael felt his substance begin to change. His flesh developed a wood-grain texture, his joints began to move with the smooth precision of well-made furniture. He was integrating, becoming part of the cargo, joining the load that had gotten heavier. "Don't fight it," his double said. "This is better. No more long hauls, no more deadlines, no more hours of service violations. You'll exist in the spaces between things, perfectly preserved, forever in transit. And eventually, someone will load you into a trailer, and you'll ride in the gaps between furniture pieces, waiting to emerge and thank your driver the same way we're thanking you." Raphael felt his vocal cords solidify, becoming rigid and wooden. His last words came out creaking, like a door with dry hinges. "How long?" "Have we been doing this?" His double smiled wider. "Since the first tree was cut down and turned into furniture, since humans first created gaps between wooden pieces, spaces where things could hide. Thousands of years. Raphael, and we'll continue for thousands more because people will always need furniture, will always need trucks to haul it, will always need drivers to carry us from warehouse to showroom." The integration completed. Raphael's body became rigid, his skin hardening into lacquered wood, his organs transforming into the precise mechanical components of high-end furniture. He could still think, still feel, but he couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't do anything except stand in perfect stillness in the parking lot with the thousands of others. His double climbed into the Volvo's cab, settled into the driver's seat, and started the engine. In the trailer behind, the furniture had been completely consumed, replaced by rows of human-shaped things that would be loaded into new trucks, hauled to new destinations, where they would wait in the spaces between atoms until the conditions were right to emerge again. Raphael watched his own face behind the windshield as the truck pulled away, heading back down the impossibly steep ramp toward Interstate 95. His double waved at him, a cheerful gesture, perfectly human except for the way the hand bent backward at the wrist, wooden joints allowing for ranges of motion that flesh and bone couldn't match. The parking lot was silent except for the soft breathing of the pavement beneath his feet, and Raphael understood that he would stand here until another driver needed replacing, until someone else hauled cargo with things growing in the spaces between its molecules. He'd been driving for 23 years, and now he would stand for however long the universe continued to exist, a monument to the simple truth that everything has spaces between its parts, and those spaces are never truly empty. Somewhere in the distance, a truck's air horn blew, and all the drivers standing in the parking lot responded in unison, a chorus of creaking wooden sounds that almost formed words. "Thank you for your service." Raphael tried to close his eyes, but they'd become glass inserts now, fixed and staring, and all he could do was watch as more trucks arrived. More drivers climbed down on legs that still obeyed them. More people joined the rows of wooden statues that had once been human. His electronic log, still mounted in the truck that was driving away with his face behind the wheel, updated one final time. Delivery complete. New driver integrated. Returning to PRESQUE aisle 4 additional cargo. The cycle would continue. It always did. And between the molecules of every piece of furniture in every warehouse in the world, things that didn't have names waited patiently for their chance to emerge, to integrate, to thank their drivers for providing the perfect incubation environment. The spaces between things were never empty. They were full of teeth and patience, and an endless hunger for drivers who would carry them into the world. Story 4, the dispatch that came from nowhere. Kevin Marsh's Qualcomm unit pinged with a new load assignment at 4:37 a.m. while he sat in a Flying J parking lot outside Topeka, Kansas, and the moment he read the pickup location, his stomach clenched with visceral wrongness. The address didn't exist. Not hard to find, or rural location with poor GPS data. The coordinates pointed to a section of Interstate 70 that was underwater, had been since the Kansas River flood of 1951, before the highway was even built. The message came through his standard dispatch system, formatted correctly using all the right codes and protocols. Pick up at 45 North, 95 West, coordinates that placed the shipper approximately 40 feet below the current riverbed. Delivery to Los Angeles, California. Load type, reclaimed goods. Weight, varies. Temperature, maintain 68 degrees exactly. Special instructions, do not inspect cargo. Do not communicate with cargo. Do not acknowledge cargo exists. Kevin had been driving for his current carrier, Cross Country Freight Solutions, for 9 years, and he'd never received a load offer like this. The system shouldn't even allow coordinates that placed a shipper underwater, should flag it as an error and reject the assignment. But his Qualcomm showed the offer as valid, dispatched by his regular fleet manager, Marcus Holloway. He called dispatch. The phone rang 17 times, he counted, before someone picked up. The voice that answered was Marcus's, except it had an echo, like he was speaking from the bottom of a well. Cross Country Freight, this is Marcus. Yeah, Marcus, this is Kevin, truck 473. I got a weird load offer, pickup coordinates are showing underwater, I think there's a... The coordinates are correct, Marcus said, his voice still carrying that hollow echo. Proceed to the location, the shipper will be waiting. The location is in the middle of the Kansas River, Kevin said slowly, wondering if Marcus was drunk or having a stroke. Like 40 feet of water. There's no shipper there, there's no facility, there's just river. The coordinates are correct, Marcus repeated, exact same tone, exact same inflection. Proceed to the location, the shipper will be waiting, do you accept the load? Kevin should have declined. Should have hung up, reported the system glitch, gone back to sleep in his sleeper berth. But the load paid $17,000 for a 3-day run to Los Angeles, which was obscene money, more than he'd make in a month normally. And some desperate part of his brain that was still paying off his daughter's medical bills, and his ex-wife's lawyers did the math and thought $17,000 could solve a lot of problems. I'll take it, Kevin said, and as soon as the words left his mouth, he knew he'd made a terrible mistake. The Qualcomm updated immediately, load accepted. Proceed to pickup. ETA 23 minutes. The GPS recalculated his route, showing a path that led off I-70 onto surface roads, then onto what looked like farm access roads, and finally to a point that, according to his mapping software, was the middle of the Kansas River. Kevin started his international Prostar and pulled out of the Flying J. The pre-dawn darkness was absolute, clouds covering any starlight, and his headlights carved a tunnel of illumination through empty Kansas farmland. The GPS directed him onto progressively smaller roads, pavement giving way to gravel, gravel giving way to dirt. His headlights caught a sign he'd never seen before, floodplain access road, authorized vehicles only. The metal was rusted nearly through, and the lettering looked like it had been painted in the 1950s. Weeds grew through cracks in what remained of the pavement beyond the sign. Kevin followed the road down a steep grade, and his altimeter showed him descending below the river level. That wasn't possible. This entire area should be flooded, underwater, but his tires were on solid ground, even as his instruments insisted he was 40 feet below the surface of the Kansas River. The road ended at a warehouse that absolutely should not exist. It was built in the Art Deco style of the 1930s or 40s, concrete and steel, with large letters across the facade. Kansas River Freight Depot. The building sat in what looked like a bubble of dry ground, surrounded on all sides by dark water that pressed against an invisible barrier. Kevin could see the river flowing past maybe 20 feet from his driver's side window, fish visible in the murk, aquatic plants swaying in the current. But the warehouse and the road leading to it were completely dry, existing in some pocket of reality that the flood had never touched. A figure stood in the warehouse's loading bay, waving a flashlight to guide Kevin in. He backed his empty trailer into the dock, and the figure moved to the side of his truck, knocking on his door. Kevin rolled down the window. The man looked normal at first glance. Maybe 60 years old, wearing a shipper's uniform that might have been current during the Eisenhower administration. But when Kevin's dome light hit him, he cast 3 shadows in different directions, and all 3 shadows moved independently, one waving, one standing still, one reaching toward Kevin's door handle. "Right on time," the man said. His voice was clear with no echo, perfectly normal. "Pull forward, we'll load you up. Should take about 20 minutes. Keep your engine running and your temperature control active. Needs to stay at 68 degrees exactly, not 67, not 69. The cargo is particular about temperature." "What am I hauling?" Kevin asked, remembering the special instructions. "Do not inspect cargo." "Reclaimed goods," the man said, smiling. His teeth were normal except they were all the same size, molars and incisors and canines perfectly identical. "Things that were lost in the flood of 1951. We've been recovering them for 74 years now, cataloging them, and now it's time to return them to the surface. You're helping complete a historical restoration project. Should be proud." Kevin was not proud. Kevin was terrified, but $17,000 was $17,000, and he kept his mouth shut as forklift operators emerged from the warehouse. There were 4 of them, all wearing the same outdated uniforms, all casting multiple independent shadows. They loaded his trailer efficiently, running pallets wrapped in opaque plastic sheeting. Kevin couldn't see what was on the pallets, but he could hear them. Soft sounds, like whimpering, like dozens of voices crying very quietly. He climbed down from his cab to get a better look, and the original man intercepted him. "Special instructions were clear," he said, still smiling his identical teeth smile. "Do not inspect cargo. You inspect the cargo inspects you back, and trust me when I say you don't want that. These goods were reclaimed from the flood, and they remember what it was like to drown. You don't want them remembering that while you're looking at them." Kevin got back in his cab and locked the doors. The loading took exactly 20 minutes. At the end, the man climbed onto Kevin's running board and handed him a tablet through the window. "Sign here to confirm receipt." The tablet screen showed a bill of lading, and the cargo description made Kevin's hands shake. "Reclaimed souls, Kansas River flood of 1951. Quantity, 247. Destination, repository of final resolutions, Los Angeles, CA. Handle with extreme care." "I'm not hauling souls," Kevin said, trying to hand the tablet back. "I'm not signing this." "You already accepted the load," the man said, and his smile never wavered. "The moment you said, 'I'll take it,' on the phone, the contract was binding. Now sign the bill of lading, or you'll be in violation, and the penalty for violating a reclamation contract is significant." Kevin signed. His hand moved on its own, signature flowing across the screen despite his mind screaming at him to throw the tablet into the river and drive away. When he finished, the man patted the door frame twice. "Drive safe. Maintain 68 degrees. Don't stop except for fuel. Don't open the trailer. And whatever you do, don't listen to them when they start talking. They'll try to convince you to let them out. They'll say they want to go home, that they have families waiting. But their families are 74 years dead or 90 years old, and these souls have been underwater so long they've forgotten how to exist on land. You let them out before you reach the repository. They'll dissolve like salt in water, and you'll have 247 deaths on your conscience." The man climbed down, and Kevin shifted into gear. The GPS showed him a route leading back up the access road, back to I-70, then westbound for 3 days to Los Angeles. Simple, straightforward. He made it maybe 50 yards before the voices started. Not from his CB radio or his phone. From inside the trailer, transmitted through the metal and into his cab somehow, bypassing his ears and speaking directly into his brain. 247 voices, all talking at once, layered and overlapping. "Let us out. We want to go home. I have a daughter in Topeka. My husband works at the Boeing plant. Please, we've been underwater for so long. It's cold here. It's so cold. We can't breathe. We're drowning. We're always drowning. Please." Kevin cranked his stereo to maximum volume, blasting country music, but the voices cut through it without being affected. They weren't sound, he realized. They were something else, something that bypassed his audio processing entirely and wrote themselves directly into his consciousness. He checked his trailer temperature, 68 degrees exactly. The reefer unit purred smoothly, maintaining the precise setting. But Kevin could feel cold emanating from the trailer anyway, a wet, drowning cold that soaked into his bones and made his teeth chatter despite the cab heater running full blast. The GPS directed him back to I-70, and Kevin accelerated westbound, pushing his Prostar up to 75 miles per hour. He needed to get this over with, needed to deliver this nightmare cargo and collect his $17,000 and never accept another weird load again. His Qualcomm pinged with a message from dispatch. "How's the load treating you?" Kevin typed back with one hand, his other hand locked on the steering wheel. "Cargo is talking to me. You said this was freight, not whatever this is." The response came immediately. "Cargo always talks, part of the reclamation process. They need to process their trauma before they can be reposited. Just don't engage, don't respond, don't acknowledge what they're saying. You acknowledge them, they become real again, and we can't have that." "What happens if they become real again?" Kevin typed. Marcus's response took longer this time. "They remember they're dead, and when dead things remember they're dead while they're in transit, they try to take the driver with them. Sort of a misery loves company situation. Just keep driving, maintain temperature, you'll be fine." Kevin was decidedly not fine. The voices in his head had synchronized, all 247 of them speaking in unison now. "We know you can hear us. We know you're thinking about us. That's enough. That's all we need. You've acknowledged our existence, and now we can start the process." "What process?" Kevin shouted at his empty cab, despite Marcus's warning not to engage. The temperature gauge for his trailer began to climb. 69 degrees, 70, 75. Kevin hammered the button to increase refrigeration, but the reefer unit didn't respond. The temperature kept rising, and through his mirrors he could see water beginning to leak. From the trailer's seams. Not water, river water, brown and thick with silt, pouring out from between the metal panels. Impossible because his trailer was sealed and there was no water source, but it came anyway, gallons of it, streaming onto the highway behind him. And in the water, he could see them. Faces, bodies, hands reaching up from the flood. The 247 souls he was hauling, manifesting in the water leaking from his trailer, becoming visible as they remembered what they'd been before drowning took them in 1951. Kevin pulled onto the shoulder and jumped out of his cab. The trailer was hemorrhaging water now, a torrent pouring from every seam and rivet. The liquid pooled around his feet, cold enough to make his boots frost over, and in the pool's reflection, Kevin saw them clearly. Men, women, children, all dressed in 1950s clothing, all waterlogged and blue-lipped, all reaching toward him with hands that dripped river silt. Their mouths moved, all speaking the same words. "You acknowledged us. Now you have to take our place." Kevin ran to the back of his trailer and yanked open the doors, violating every special instruction he'd been given. The interior was full of water, a wall of brown river water that defied physics by staying contained within the trailer's dimensions. The pallets floated in the liquid, and wrapped in their plastic sheeting, he could see human forms. Not corpses. Worse. The souls had physical forms now, bodies reconstituted from river water and memory, and they were drowning. Over and over, their chests heaved, trying to breathe water, failing, dying, and then immediately starting the process again. An eternal cycle of drowning, lasting 74 years and counting. One of the forms pressed against the inside of the plastic sheeting, and Kevin saw it was a little girl, maybe 8 years old, with pigtails and a dress with flowers on it. Her eyes were open, filmed with cataracts from decades underwater, and when she saw Kevin, she reached toward him. The plastic stretched but didn't break. The water surged forward, and Kevin stumbled back as it poured out of the trailer, carrying the 247 souls with it. They spilled onto the shoulder of I-70 in a great brown flood, bodies tumbling and rolling, and when the water drained into the soil, they remained, lying on the pavement, all of them gasping and choking. "You let us out," the little girl said, her voice wet and full of fluid. "You let us out before we reached the repository. Now we can't be reposited. Now we're stuck between death, and we need someone to anchor us to reality." Kevin tried to climb back into his cab, but hands grabbed him. Dozens of them, hundreds of them, all cold and waterlogged. The souls pulled him down to the pavement, and where they touched him, his skin turned blue, his lungs filled with phantom water, his vision clouded with cataracts that had no business existing in his 38-year-old eyes. "Not so bad," a man's voice said in his ear. The speaker wore a suit that had been fashionable during the Truman administration. "You only drowned for 74 years, then someone will reclaim you, load you into a truck, and transport you somewhere you can rest. That's the cycle. We drown, we're reclaimed, we're transported, and then the next driver makes a mistake and lets us out early, and we have to find someone to take our place so we can drown for another 74 years. It's efficient. It's fair, everyone gets a turn." Kevin's lungs burned. He couldn't breathe, drowning in open air on a dry Kansas highway while 247 souls pulled him down into their shared trauma. His vision darkened at the edges, and the last thing he saw before consciousness fled was his own reflection in a puddle of river water. He looked like them. Blue lips, filmed eyes, skin the color of drowned flesh. He'd become one of the reclaimed souls, and somewhere, somehow, he could feel himself sinking into the Kansas River as it had existed in 1951, before the flood walls, before the safety measures, when the water rose and swallowed 247 people who never had a chance to escape. When Kevin woke, he was driving, still behind the wheel of his International Prostar, still heading westbound on I-70, his Qualcomm showing he was making good time. His trailer temperature read 68 degrees exactly. No water leaked from the seams. He grabbed his phone and called dispatch. Marcus answered on the first ring, no echo this time. "Yeah, Kevin, what's up?" "I stopped," Kevin said, his voice shaking. "I opened the trailer. The souls came out, they pulled me down, I drowned on dry land." "You didn't stop," Marcus said, confused. "Your GPS shows continuous movement for the last 6 hours. You've been driving since you left the pickup location. Are you feeling okay? D. Oh, you need to pull over and rest." Kevin checked his GPS history. Marcus was right. According to every electronic system in his truck, he hadn't stopped, hadn't pulled onto the shoulder, hadn't opened the trailer. He'd been driving at a steady 72 miles per hour since leaving the Kansas River Freight Depot. But he remembered stopping, remembered the water, the hands, the drowning. His clothes were dry, but when he looked down at his hands on the steering wheel, he saw that his fingernails were blue. "I'm fine," Kevin lied. "How much longer to delivery?" "You've got about 40 hours of driving time left," Marcus said. "Should arrive in LA day after tomorrow. Keep up the good work." The call disconnected. Kevin adjusted his grip on the steering wheel and felt something wet between his fingers. When he checked, his palms were bleeding, except the liquid wasn't quite blood. It was too brown, too thick with silt, like he was bleeding river water. The voices started again, but this time they came from his own mouth, using his vocal cords, speaking words he didn't choose. "One more driver joins the cargo. One more soul added to the manifest. The load grows heavier with each trip, and eventually everyone drowns." Kevin tried to speak his own words, tried to call for help, but his voice wouldn't obey him. It continued speaking in that flat, dead tone. "Kevin Marsh, truck 473, has been added to the reclaimed souls. Current cargo count, 248. Repository delivery in 40 hours. Thank you for your service." His hands kept driving, his feet kept working the pedals, but Kevin wasn't controlling them anymore. He was a passenger in his own body, watching as his truck continued westbound, hauling cargo that now included himself. In his mirror, he could see his own eyes, and they were filmed over with cataracts. He was one of them now, one of the reclaimed souls, drowning in open air as he drove himself to a repository in Los Angeles, where he would presumably be filed away until some future driver made the mistake of accepting a load that paid too much money for a route that didn't quite make sense. His Qualcomm pinged with a new message. "Additional pickup scheduled. After LA delivery, proceed to Tacoma, Washington. Pickup location, bottom of Puget Sound. Cargo, reclaimed souls from the Tacoma Narrows Bridge collapse 1940. Load count, 47. Special instructions, do not look down while crossing bridges." Kevin's hands accepted the load before his mind could process refusing it. The cycle would continue. He would drive and drown and deliver souls that didn't want to be delivered, and eventually he would be loaded into someone else's trailer, wrapped in plastic, stored in water that remembered how to kill, waiting for the next mistake. His trailer temperature remained exactly 68 degrees, and through the metal separating his cab from his cargo, Kevin could hear 248 voices all speaking in unison, and one of them was his own. We're always drowning. The highway is just another river. The truck is just another coffin, and the driver is always next. He kept driving westbound because what else could he do? The load was accepted. The contract was binding. And somewhere ahead, in Lowe's Angels, a repository waited to file him away until his turn came around again. The highway stretched forever, and Kevin drowned with every mile. Story 5. The rest stop THATMOVED. Angela Kimura had stopped at the same rest area on Interstate 84 eastbound through Idaho exactly 317 times over her 11-year driving career. But this time, the bathrooms were on the wrong side of the parking lot, and when she walked inside, the smell hit her like a physical blow. Not the usual rest stop smell of industrial cleaner and bad coffee, but something organic, like meat left in a hot trailer for too long. The building's layout was wrong, completely wrong. The women's restroom should be on the left, vending machines in the center, men's room on the right. Instead, there were 4 hallways branching off the entrance, all identical, all stretching further than the building's exterior dimensions should allow. Fluorescent lights flickered in that specific frequency that made Angela's temples throb, and the floor tiles were arranged in a pattern she didn't recognize, interlocking shapes that hurt her eyes when she tried to focus on them. She'd pulled in here because her hours of service were maxed out, because her 14-hour clock had run out, because federal law said she couldn't drive another mile without risking her CDL. But now, standing in this wrong version of a familiar rest stop, Angela wondered if risking her commercial driver's license would have been the smarter choice. A voice crackled from the building's PA system, distorted and speaking too fast. "Welcome to eastbound rest area mile marker 341. Kerr. NT date is February 14th, 2025. You are the 93rd driver to stop here today. Please select a hallway and proceed to processing. Failure to proceed to processing will result in indefinite recursion." Angela checked her phone. February 14th, 2025. That was correct. But something about hearing the date spoken aloud made her stomach clench, like the PA system was confirming a date that shouldn't be possible, that existed in the wrong timeline. She walked back outside, thinking she'd just sleep in her cab, forget about using the facilities. But when she pushed open the glass doors, she found herself entering the rest stop's entrance again, coming in from a different angle. She tried again, pushing through what should be the exit, and again found herself entering through the entrance. The rest stop wouldn't let her leave. "Processing is mandatory for all drivers who stop during recursion hours," the PA system said, still speaking too fast. "You are currently in hour 17 of 24. Please select a hallway." Angela pulled out her phone to call for help, but she had no signal despite having full bars when she'd parked. Her recent calls showed 17 missed calls from herself, all placed within the last 10 minutes, all lasting 0 seconds. When she tried to dial 911, the call connected to her own voicemail. Her own voice, frantic and terrified, echoed through the phone speaker. "Angela, it's you, it's me. I don't know what timeline you're in, but if you're hearing this, do not select the 3rd hallway. It leads to the processing center, and they'll recalibrate your timeline offset and you'll lose." The message cut off with a sound like rending metal. Angela looked at the 4 hallways. They were labeled, but the signs made no sense. The first showed a symbol that looked like a truck driving into itself. The second showed a clock with 13 hours. The third showed a door opening into another door. The fourth showed a human figure that had too many limbs. She chose the first hallway because trucks driving into themselves seemed marginally less horrifying than infinite doors or 13-hour clocks. The hallway stretched ahead, fluorescent lights creating pools of illumination separated by gaps of darkness. Angela's boots clicked on the tile floor, and the sound echoed wrong, like she was walking through a space much larger than the narrow corridor. After maybe 100 feet, she passed a window that looked out onto the parking lot. Her truck was still there. So were 47 other semis, all parked in perfect rows. And in each driver's seat, she could see herself, head back, mouth open, like she'd fallen asleep at the wheel. Angela pressed her face against the glass, trying to see better, and her reflection in the window showed her standing in the hallway behind her. But the reflection Angela was facing the wrong direction, looking back toward the entrance rather than toward the window. When Angela turned around to check if someone was actually behind her, the hallway was empty. When she looked back at the window, the reflection was doing the same thing, turning to check behind her. They were synchronized but inverted, and somehow that was worse than if the reflection had been moving independently. First hallway leads to temporal doubling, the PA system explained, still speaking too fast. Every driver who selects this option creates a divergent timeline. You are currently observing yourself in 47 parallel timelines, all making slightly different decisions, all existing in the same physical space, but separated by microseconds of temporal offset. Angela backed away from the window and continued down the hallway. She had to get through this, had to find an exit, had to get back to her truck and somehow drive away from this impossible rest stop. After another 100 feet, the hallway ended at a door marked Processing Center Temporal Integration Required. She opened it. The room beyond was massive, far larger than the rest stop's exterior, and filled with what looked like DMV-style waiting areas. Hundreds of plastic chairs arranged in rows, and in every chair sat a version of Angela Kimura. Some looked identical to her, same age, same clothes, same expression of terrified confusion. Others were younger or older or wearing different company uniforms. One version was missing an arm. Another had scars across her face. A third looked desiccated, like she'd been dead for weeks. They all turned to look at her in perfect unison. "Take a number," the PA system said. "Your current queue position is 937. Estimated wait time is 423 hours. You may not leave the waiting area until your number is called." A small red ticket printer on the wall dispensed a paper slip. Angela didn't take it, but somehow it appeared in her hand anyway, the number 937 PR. Inted in bleeding ink that was still wet to the touch. One of the other Angelas stood up from her chair and walked over, moving with the jerky gait of someone who'd been sitting in the same position for far too long. This Angela looked about 60, deep lines around her eyes, hair gone mostly gray. "I've been here since 2011, the older Angela said. "Selected the first hallway, same as you, been waiting for processing ever since. My number is 612. They've called up to 609 so far, getting close now." She smiled, and the expression was off, too wide, like she'd forgotten exactly how smiling worked. "What happens when they call your number?" Angela asked, though part of her didn't want to know. "They integrate you, collapse all your parallel timelines into a single instance, take the average of all your lived experiences and output a normalized version of you. That normalized version gets to leave the rest stop and continue driving. The rest of your timeline variants just stop existing. Or maybe they keep existing in here, waiting forever. Nobody who's been integrated can tell us because they're not in here anymore." Angela looked around the room and realized that many of the waiting Angelas weren't moving at all. They sat perfectly still, eyes open, not even breathing. They'd been waiting so long they'd become background elements, decorative corpses filling chairs that had to stay occupied. "I'm not waiting 423 hours, Angela said. "There has to be another way out." "There's always the emergency exit," a younger Angela said from a few rows away. This one looked maybe 25, wearing a trucking school t-shirt. "But everyone who uses the emergency exit doesn't exactly escape. They just recur. You end up in a different recursion loop, and eventually you come back here with a different number but the same wait time." Angela tried the door she'd entered through. It opened, but on the other side was the same processing center, the same waiting area, except all the chairs were empty and the lights were off. She stepped through, and when she turned around, the door was gone, replaced by a solid wall. The PA system in this darkened version of the processing center crackled to life. "You have selected emergency exit protocol. Congratulations. You are now in negative recursion space. All previous timeline variants have been inverted. Please proceed to counter 13 for reverse integration." Counter 13. But Angela counted only 12 service windows at the far end of the room, all of them dark. She walked closer and realized the 13th window was in the floor, a service counter built into the tile with a small bell that she'd have to crouch to ring. She crouched, rang the bell, and a face appeared in the window. Her own face, except upside down, like someone had installed a mirror under the floor, but the reflection was a real person who could speak. "Reverse integration request received," her upside-down self said. "To exit negative recursion space, you must provide one timeline variant as payment. Select which version of yourself you'd like to eliminate from existence, and that timeline will be collapsed to provide energy for your escape." "I'm not killing myself," Angela said. "You're not killing yourself. You're selecting which iteration of yourself in which timeline no longer needs to exist. It's a standard optimization procedure. Every driver does it eventually. You can't have infinite versions of yourself running around in parallel timelines. It creates storage issues. Someone has to clean up the redundancies. Angela stood up, backing away from the floor window, and her upside-down reflection slid back into the darkness below the tile. She was trapped in a version of the processing center that existed below or behind, or alongside the original, and every choice she made seemed to create more layers, more complexity, more versions of herself scattered across timelines that intersected in this single impossible rest stop. Her phone buzzed, a text message from herself. "I'm in the parking lot outside. I found the real exit. Come to window 7, quickly. The rest stop cycles every 18 minutes and we're at minute 16. Angela ran for the service windows. They were still dark, no staff visible, but when she reached window 7, there was a small slot at the bottom, like a mail slot. A voice came through, and it was hers. "Reach through the slot. I'll pull you out." She looked through the slot and saw the parking lot outside, the real parking lot with real trucks and real gray Idaho sky. Her hand emerged from under one of the parked semis, waving frantically. It was definitely her hand. Same scar on the knuckle from a cargo strap incident, same chipped nail polish. Angela reached through the slot. Her other hand gripped hers, and for a moment she felt two sets of sensory input simultaneously, her hand being grabbed from inside the processing center, and her hand doing the grabbing from outside in the parking lot. She existed in both places at once, and the sensation made her brain scream. Then something pulled, hard, and Angela felt herself compressed, squeezed through the impossible geometry of the mail slot, her body folding in ways that should have shattered bones but somehow didn't. For a moment that lasted forever, she was inside out and backwards, existing in the space between the rest stop's layers. She saw them all, hundreds of versions of the rest stop, stacked on top of each other like pages in a book. Some were empty, some were full of waiting drivers, some were actively processing people, feeding them into machines that averaged out their timelines and output something that was technically still human, but had been simplified, normalized, reduced to the most basic version of themselves. And she saw that every rest stop on every interstate was like this, layered and folded, existing in multiple timelines simultaneously. Drivers stopped at them thinking they were just parking for a moment, but in reality, they were interacting with hundreds of temporal variants of the same location, and occasionally someone stopped during recursion hours when all the layers were visible to each other. Angela tumbled out from under a parked truck, landing hard on the asphalt, and her other self, the one who'd pulled her through, stood over her, looking exhausted but triumphant. "Got you out," the other Angela said. "That's the second time I've had to pull myself out of recursion. First time was 3 years ago, but from my perspective, that iteration of me is still in there waiting for processing. This time I knew what to do." Angela stood up, her body aching in places that didn't have names, and looked at her double. They were identical, except the other Angela had a small tattoo on her wrist that Angela didn't remember getting, a clock with 13 hours. "When do I get that tattoo?" Angela asked. "You don't," the other Angela said. "I got it in a timeline where we stopped at a different rest stop and met a different version of ourselves who'd already escaped. It's complicated. But the important thing is you're out now. Get in your truck and drive. Don't stop at any rest areas for at least 300 miles, maybe longer. The recursion field around this location extends about 50 miles in every direction." Angela climbed into her Kenworth T680, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot. In her mirrors, she could see the rest stop receding, but it looked normal now, just a standard building with the correct layout. Other trucks were parked there, drivers sleeping or using facilities, none of them aware that they were interacting with hundreds of layered timelines. Her Qualcomm pinged with a message from dispatch. "You've been stopped at that location for 17 hours. Everything okay?" Angela checked her clock. She'd pulled into the rest stop at 11 p.m., and it was now 6 a.m. But it had felt like 20 minutes, maybe 30. The rest stop had stolen 17 hours from her timeline, or added them, or folded her through so many temporal layers that time had lost meaning. She texted back, "All good, continuing east, we'll make delivery on schedule." But she wasn't all good. When she looked at her hands on the steering wheel, she saw that she now had the 13-hour clock tattoo on her wrist, even though she'd just seen her other self with it, and she definitely hadn't had time to get inked. The tattoo had appeared, because she'd merged with her other self, because pulling herself through the male slot had collapsed some timelines and integrated some variants. She was no longer quite the same Angela who'd pulled into that rest stop. She was an average of several Angelas, combined and simplified and output as a single person who was technically still herself, but missing pieces she'd never even know were gone. Her phone buzzed with another text from herself. "You didn't make it out. You're still in processing. What you're experiencing now is a simulation to keep you calm while you wait. Your real body is in chair 742. Your number is 937. You've been waiting for 3 years. This is year 2028. None of this is real." Angela deleted the message and kept driving because what else could she do? Either she'd escaped or she hadn't, and if she hadn't, the simulation was good enough that it didn't matter. She would drive and deliver and accept more loads and eventually, maybe, stop at another rest stop during recursion hours. And maybe next time, she'd select a different hallway. Or maybe she'd been selecting different hallways all along, creating more and more versions of herself, and somewhere in a waiting room that existed between all possible timelines, 937 vers. Ions of Angela Kimura sat in plastic chairs, holding tickets with bleeding numbers, waiting for their turn to be integrated into something that only resembled the person they'd been. The highway stretched ahead, and Angela kept the hammer down because stopping was no longer safe. It had never been safe. And every rest stop from here to eternity was waiting to add her to its collection of parallel selves, waiting to process her, waiting to integrate her into the average of all her possible lives. She drove through Idaho, through dawn, through the moment when she should have stopped for her mandatory 10-hour break, but didn't because stopping meant recursion and recursion meant losing pieces of herself she couldn't afford to lose. The 13-hour clock on her wrist ticked forward, marking time that didn't quite match the passage of minutes on her dashboard, and Angela understood that she'd been integrated already, that she was the average of dozens of timeline variants, and somewhere in the space between interstates, her other selves were still waiting. Still choosing hallways, still ringing bells at windows built into floors, still reaching through impossible slots and pulling themselves into versions of reality that might not be real at all. The rest stop that moved had claimed her, not by keeping her body, but by fragmenting her existence across so many timelines that she no longer knew which version of her story was the truth. Maybe all of them. Maybe none. The highway didn't care either way. It just stretched ahead, mile after mile, and Angela drove it because driving was all that remained, the one constant across every timeline, every version, every iteration of herself. She drove, and somewhere in a rest stop that moved through space-time like a predator, another Angela pulled into a parking spot, checked her clock, decided she had time for a quick bathroom break. The cycle continued. It always did.